of Stevens Point Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission meeting, recorded December 17, 2024.
The time is 6 o'clock, December 17th, and I call to order the Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission meeting. First is roll call.
Fisher?
Here.
Guthrie?
Here.
Waldschweiler?
Here.
Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Hey, there we go. Johnson?
Here.
And Peterson.
Here.
5 members, and we got a quorum.
Item 2 is to select a vice chairperson. Can I nominate someone?
Anybody could nominate anybody.
Sure.
So,
I'm going to attempt. I'd like to nominate Carol.
I decline
Okay.
the nomination. Is that what I say?
you can decline if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
And then there were 3.
It was my first day. I don't know what's going on.
Same here.
Can Jackie be the vice? Oh, yeah. Then can I nominate Jackie?
I second, if that's how you do it.
Do you accept Jackie?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I accept. All right.
All right, then we just need all those in favor.
Why not have
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed?
Huh?
Yeah, you just have to ask, are there any opposed?
Oh, are there
No,
any opposed?
It's semantics.
No, I forgot. You're right. I was like, wait, what? Okay, item number 3, report for the June 6, 2024 meeting of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission. I guess I'd say I would vote to approve the minutes. I don't have any notes.
Second.
Now we just need all those in favor.
All those in favor?
You're good.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Any opposed? Passes. Number 4, discussion on a draft bicycle parking ordinance.
All right, thank you, Chair. So I kind of went in depth here in the agenda packet, kind of outlining the history and how we got to this point. So I'm going to summarize some of the main nuggets to kind of give you folks up to speed as to the scope of this conversation this evening. So first off, I'm sure some of you know we already have a bicycle parking ordinance within our zoning code. The full scope of that ordinance is on the screen here. And what it does is really identify, or it really outlines 2 different items. First one being the metric that's used to calculate how many bike parking spaces are required. And then the second one being more design specific, outlining the design requirements for the bicycle parking infrastructure that would be installed on any property. So ultimately, how I determine as zoning administrator the number of bike parking spaces that are required, it's based off of the number of vehicle parking spaces that are provided on any one lot. And I only included one snippet. I included, I think, the full parking lot table in the agenda packet. That would be on page 11 through top of page 14. That is our parking ratio table that outlines for like any given land use. This is the ratio that I have to use to calculate the number of vehicle parking spaces that are required. So how does that translate to the number of bike parking spaces that's needed? So essentially, if there's any parking lot that's providing at least 20 vehicles, but not less than 100 vehicle parking spaces, that development, that land use is required to provide 6 bike parking spaces. And then for every additional 25 parking spaces beyond that 100, you would be required to add 1 additional bike parking. So it might not make sense just me verbally saying it, but there's some math involved, ultimately calculating the number of vehicle parking spaces that are needed, which would then in turn determine the amount of bike parking spaces that's required. Now, as I mentioned in the memorandum to you folks, over time, there's been a few issues that I've come across with respect to reviewing new developments here in town. And I think chief among them are two things that can both be true. First, there's some land uses in this land use table that, to be frank, it doesn't necessarily make sense to require bike parking. I think the most egregious example I gave in the packet was a car wash, right? I don't think someone would utilize a bike to go to a car wash per se. Conversely, there are situations where we don't require nearly enough bike parking spaces, in my opinion, for certain types of development. And I think chief among them, I think the one that clearly stands out would be multifamily development. So why do I say that? It's more so because of the metric that's used to calculate the number of bike parking spaces that's needed. And that correlation between vehicle parking spaces and bike parking spaces. So within our zoning code, I have our zoning map here of the entire city. There are certain zoning districts where we exempt, where we do not have any minimum parking requirements for vehicles, right? This would be areas like the downtown, kind of the smaller area along Belts and Carl D's, the Division Street corridor from 4th Ave up to the roundabout. Those are areas that they're not required to meet this parking ratio table that I have on the screen. So as such, because of that positive correlation that exists between vehicle parking spaces and bike parking spaces, we're ultimately diminishing the amount of bike parking that would be required by ordinance as a result. One example, and this would be the most recent example, Alder Guthrie, I know you know this example quite well. I'm not sure other folks on the commission, but there was a proposed multifamily housing development off of Maria Drive that went before our Plan Commission and Council through the appropriate approvals. This would have been a 60 some odd unit multifamily apartment complex, and by ordinance, our current bike parking ordinance, they would be required to provide either 6 or 7 bike parking spaces. And that was the belief amongst our Plan Commission and our council that that was not nearly enough given the amount of new housing units that would be created, the adjacent housing complex directly to the west, and just the fact that it's along our Division Street corridor right next to campus, that you're going to naturally incite more multimodal forms of transportation, which is really the intent of this overlay district that exempts minimum parking requirements, vehicle parking requirements in the first place. So I kind of tiptoed a little bit earlier, and this is really the conundrum. What I'm about to say is really the conundrum that exists here, and that there's that positive correlation between vehicle parking and bike parking. If we require more vehicle parking spaces for any development, you're naturally going to increase the amount of bike parking that's going to be required by ordinance. Conversely, if we reduce the amount of vehicle parking spaces that's required, you're also going to reduce the amount of bike parking spaces that's required. And I think naturally, based off of the intent of our Plan Commission, our council, over the years, you really want to have more of that negative correlation in certain areas where you're decreasing the amount of vehicle parking spaces, but in turn increasing the amount of bike parking spaces to provide more of that multimodal forms of transportation. So before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the draft ordinance, I want to talk about really the intent behind this ordinance draft, and then outline two key points that I want to raise. So first, really the scope of this draft ordinance is broken down into two bullet points. One being to change a metric that's used for requiring bicycle parking, swapping out the vehicle parking space as that metric, and in turn using really a similar parking ratio that we utilize already for vehicle parking spaces. Secondly, there are some design requirements that are codified, that are altered in this draft ordinance. It's not major in the whole grand scheme of things. It provides some pictures to more accurately depict the types of infrastructure that is preferred versus not preferred. And the intent here, I know it might sound minor, but having an ordinance in this case that would be consistent with federal standards for bike parking infrastructure, will it necessarily tip the scales per se for future grant applications for transportation projects? Maybe, maybe not, but it improves the odds nonetheless, in my opinion. So, and then lastly, the 2 bullet points that I have on the bottom of the screen, I just want to make this point clear when we're talking about the number of spaces that's required. And the first being that it's not necessarily the case where one piece of infrastructure is going to equate to one bike parking space that's provided. Depending on the design, depending on the type of bicycle rack, for example, that's installed, you can have more than one bike parking space that utilizes it. And then lastly, the intent, the scope of this draft ordinance, as we discuss it this evening and in future meetings, existing developments, existing businesses are not going to be subject to this new ordinance. They'd be considered grandfathered like any other change that happens in our zoning code. What happens, this is going to be more impactful per se as for a new development that occurs or for additions, let's just say, onto existing developments. And that really goes to the heart where a zoning ordinance, broadly speaking, is meant to try to establish a vision of how we want development to occur and look like in our city over the decades to come. There's not going to be necessarily an immediate change. This is looking more out into the decades that follow. So I am going to swap the slide, and I'm going to go to just going to pull up the packet, and I'm going to break out the conversation into 2 different chunks. The first talking more about the ordinance itself, and then second talking about the ratios, just since that's going to be a little bit more nuanced of a conversation. So for the draft ordinance, you can see I'm not going to go through every detail. I think some key points to point out rather. So this section right here, this would be subsection 1. I purposely added these 2 bullet points to encourage shared parking arrangements for properties that are zoned B2 Central Business Transition and B3 Central Business. In layman's terms, this is the downtown. I recognize that space is limited. A lot of the buildings, especially along Main Street and Clark Street, are 0 lot line development where 100% of the lot is building. There's no yard, so to speak, where you could install a bike rack, let's just say. So include the provision about recommending and permitting shared bicycle parking arrangements, and then also making the note for allowing somebody to tap into public bike parking infrastructure in order to meet their personal requirement for bike parking needs. It's no different than what we already require for vehicle parking spaces. So other than that, like I mentioned, here includes the examples just outlining what types of bike rack designs are permitted and then which ones would be prohibited. So I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to kick it back to the commission. This would be focusing on comments, suggestions for items on page 15 through 17 of the packet. So happy to hear anything that you like, anything that you dislike, before we kick it over to 2 comments that I have as noted in the packet about lighting and covered parking.
Well, I guess I'll say I think it's a big improvement. A lot of work went into it, obviously, because the other one was really simplified, just comparing it to the parking, where this one's more thought out. because I think about with the downtown, there's a lot, and near the downtown, there's a lot of multi-family type homes being built. And then I would think they would be people that would be more likely to bike or walk to places. And some of those places, like you said, don't have minimum parking, and then, so they might not get any bike parking in their development. You made some notes. Are we supposed to, should we discuss on the notes?
I will. I'm just gonna, I just want more kind of big picture, things that you like, things that you dislike. Because I know these are two pointed questions that I have for you folks that I think is gonna lead to a good conversation as well.
I'll just say broadly that I appreciate decoupling number of car parking spots from ratio of number of bike parking spots, and I also appreciate the city's view that we can be a part of the solution for denser areas like downtown so that it doesn't prohibit business growth into a certain building or area if they're feeling stuck in terms of what they can provide. So I'll just say kudos to you, and I think we had an intern over the summer, Anna,
Yes.
who helped with some of the research and drafting, so thanks so much to staff for modernizing and providing sort of a progressive draft that should make things more comfortable for folks who commute and use our businesses throughout the community for running errands and other things by bicycle. I think while this won't provide immediate change, as we develop, if something like this were to be adopted, it would align with the vision that I, as a bicycler, like to see in terms of what where I will be accommodated and where I can expect to be able to park safely and securely as I'm doing my business.
So as a point of reference to me,
Yes.
there really isn't an ordinance?
There is.
There is?
Yeah, so let me, I'm just gonna pull it up on the screen. It's not gonna be on the, on Zoom, but, so this slide, this is currently on the books.
And as you said before, so a lot of the businesses and/or dwellings do not have to have racks if they did in the past, they're like grandfathered or?
So, yeah, so whatever iteration of updates occur to this bike parking ordinance, if there's any existing developments that do not meet this requirement, this ordinance as written, we wouldn't be able to force them to adhere to today's ordinance. They'd be grandfathered.
You don't see a lot of racks around in a lot of the, current dwellings around town.
No, and I'll say too, I mean, this iteration of our bike parking ordinance currently on the books, this is relatively new, relatively as in about, I think, a decade or so.
Okay.
So there's just a lot of land uses that have been in existence for more than 10 years where there wasn't any bike
No.
parking ordinance on
Okay.
the books.
That's what I thought, yeah.
I do have a question. Why for like parks and open spaces, does it say none except when recommended within the city's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan?
I'll put a pin on that. That's going to be the kind of the next
Oh, sure.
section
Okay.
of the next section of the conversation.
Sure.
Great question, but just a pin.
It looks like we have an inquiry via chat.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm sorry, I did not see that. Yeah, our media department records it, Trevor. So. Oh, Trevor, you can talk if you
Cool
want.
beans. All right. Thanks, Adam. How's everybody doing? It's pretty exciting. This is back on the table, so thanks to staff and Anna and folks for getting this going again. Yeah, I like how comprehensive it is. Since we're just talking bigger picture so far, some of my notes, Adam, you mentioned in the memo that kind of situations where it would invoke the ordinance. And I'm wondering if there's a few more possibilities, such as a change of use. So like, let's say, for example, you have a use that is very low pedestrian or very low bicycle demand, and then it changes use, it's a retrofit of a building. All of a sudden, whoa, we want a lot of people here, not necessarily expanding our parking lot, but we want a lot of bike parking. Is that a possibility, you think?
Good question, and I did not include this in the memo more because I would have been very deep in the weeds of zoning administration, and don't get me wrong, I love to talk about it, as you hopefully can tell, but it'd be more confusing than anything. But to answer your question directly, Trevor, yes, but however, it would be based on if there is a change of use where there is a different parking ratio requirement. So say if you're going from, let me see a good example. If you're going from say you have an existing bank with a drive-through and they decide, I'm going to strike out the drive-through lanes. We're going to have it completely, we're going to have this established cater solely to folks that are walking in and out of the building. That necessarily wouldn't trigger the need for meeting this current or this proposed ordinance, because the ratio that's used from current use to proposed use would be the same. To give one example where it would differ is, say you're converting a house into a restaurant, or you're converting a restaurant into a dance studio, let's just say. You see this calculation for a restaurant would be 2 spaces or 1 space per 4,000 square feet of floor area. A dance studio type use would be the 1 space per 2,000. So in that situation, the ratio between current and proposed would be different, and as such, this ordinance would come into play. What I'll say is that would be similar to the approach taken for calculating the number of vehicle parking spaces that are required. If you're having a change of use where our vehicle parking ratio requirement is more stringent, obviously as part of me signing off on that proposed land use, they're going to have to add X number of vehicle parking spaces. So it's a long way of saying, yes, it's dependent on what ratios would ultimately be used as part of that transition.
Okay, is that just going to be spelled out though? So some developer would understand change of use will invoke this if, the ratios are changed or whatever.
Yeah, that would be part of the conversations I have with them.
Okay. So 2 other ideas, which I was just, I think, looking at the APBP guide. And one is like reconstructing a parking lot. I think this is a great one to add because we have 2 examples more recently in Stevens Point where it was really unfortunate that the bike parking didn't really change. The police department, for example, still have the same crappy schoolyard rack in a really tight, bad place. And then the fire department, I don't think they have a bike parking except for the artistic rack, which doesn't meet zoning code. But those are are 2 examples recently that if you reconstruct a parking lot, it would make sense to accommodate bicycle parking as well. Is that something that can get added?
I will defer to the commission if there's an interest or not.
Is it just like, I'm trying to understand, sorry, Trevor, is it just like they're fixing the parking lot, or are they like redeveloping it to have more spaces, like more people would be coming to the area? Like when downtown they added a ton of spaces by changing the positions of the cars, essentially. If you get what I mean.
Well, in the first example of the police department, it was a full reconstruction of the same footprint.
Okay.
To me, as a resident, where the city spent whatever hundreds of thousands or whatever money on that parking lot, and there was no accommodation improvement to bicycle parking, it doesn't make any sense with all the different varied uses. So that's just a full reconstruction, the same footprint. The other example, are you thinking of Ellis Street near Century, where they reoriented the parking lines?
No, downtown when they, like, I was just saying, like, when they, like, added a bunch of spaces. I don't know if that happens in parking lots, but, like, it like, completely changes the lot then, if they were able to add more spaces, you know?
It seems reasonable to me, and I don't know how you would articulate this, Adam, if they are reconstructing a parking lot and pouring concrete, right? If they are adjusting entrances and curbs and sidewalk and things like that, it does seem reasonable to me that they would, just like gutting a house and having to attend to wiring, right? It seems reasonable, to Trevor's point, to think about modernizing biking infrastructure. Just repainting is not infrastructure. That to me is akin to painting a room in a house. You shouldn't be asked to rewire a house if you want to paint a bedroom. So I don't know how you would write that up, but that seems like a reasonable litmus test to carry forward.
I think one way I could is, so our parking lot ordinance is many pages deep. But there is a section in there that talks about how resurfacing a parking lot, if it's grandfathered, i.e. doesn't meet current dimensional requirements, setback requirements, etc., that property owner is allowed to resurface that parking lot like for like and not have to meet current code. Conversely, a reconstruction, as you're describing, Jackie, that in that situation they would be required to meet current ordinance. So that's where I think that language could be used, is differentiate between resurface versus reconstruction.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, if you can manifest that in language here, I think that seems like a reasonable standard. Do others on the commission concur?
I agree.
I agree.
Very cool. Thanks. There was one more idea, which is right from the guide, the APBP guide as well, and that's basically replacing old bike parking. So the way they say it is replacement of current bicycle parking. I know it's not as easy to administer from your point of view, Adam, necessarily, but I think the language in there could encourage a business owner or a landowner or developer to say, oh, our bike parking doesn't meet modern code, but we want to actually meet modern code and accommodate cyclists. When we replace this in a year and it's all rusted out, what should we get? So that's another possible idea.
Okay. Appreciate it, Trevor. So I'm going to kick us back to the two comments that I have on the screen. I'm going to start with the second one first about lighting. I've kind of gone back and forth on this in my head about adding an ordinance provision requiring that the bike parking facilities be lit. My argument for the yes, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Having a lit area makes it a heck of a lot easier to park a bicycle. It makes it more encouraging for folks to utilize a bicycle for their transportation needs if they naturally feel safe in the area where they're going to be loading and unloading goods and materials. The one argument that I would have against it is more so because of this would be section 2 right here, saying that bike parking facilities have to be located within 120 feet of the main building entrance and visible from a public right-of-way. That in and of itself, you're naturally going to have some degree of light, some degree of visibility because of that requirement. So I've been kind of going back and forth, but I'd like to hear from you folks. Should there be a requirement? If so, I would frame it probably in the sense that you have to have, X number of foot candles of light intensity at that area. But I guess I'd heed your opinion as a commission.
I think there should be a lighting requirement because, like, if you're, let's say you're in a parking lot and you're like at the other end from the light, you don't go there on purpose. I mean, you only park there if you have to. I mean, it's not where I would choose to go because it's like, after dark, it's like creepy. And
I
the
agree
same
that-
thing would go because it's kind of like in the shadows if it's not right bright.
There should be some degree of lighting. Plus, if you're, you're locking up your bike and unlocking it, it's nice to have some light because that in itself can take a little, finessing, so. And again, the safety factor is pretty much the bottom line there.
But I appreciate what you're saying, Adam, that naturally a certain minimum amount of light will occur by its relation to the main drag or the street and its relationship to the front entrance of a presumably lit business or something like that. Is it possible to say if X amount of light is not provided by relationship to, other factors that it shall be installed? So hopefully it's kind of an 80-20. 80% are going to be able to say, oh, cool, we'll put it right here, and then the light over the front door covers it. But in the case that it wouldn't, then they are basically forced to provide light.
Yeah, that's easily doable.
Yeah, because if it's like Jackie said, in front of the doorways, that's one thing, but if it's down the side of a building that's somewhat longer, it gets darker in a hurry, or, in the corner, then they could put some kind of lighting. Maybe.
That was basically my note that I wrote. I just said I don't know how to determine a well-lit location, but I think
There
if there's
probably-
already sufficient lighting, it would be
There are probably standards in
unnecessary.
Adam's business, fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I will say is, because naturally, any parking lot project that comes before my desk for approval, one of the requirements is that you have to submit a photometric plan outlining the light the light intensity at so many different areas within the parking lot. And typically, it's about, most areas of a parking lot are about 1/2 to 1 foot candle of light intensity, which is not crazy amount, so.
Not a baseball field at night, but like a parking lot at night, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Trevor, I see your hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is a great idea. At one point, I guess I could might make it even easier to meet this requirement is that 120 feet seems like kind of a far distance if you're assuming light might be coming from a storefront or whatever. A good example might be when the Cobblestone Hotel was built. They had their bike parking in the front at first on the rocks, and it was a okay location, but then they moved to the back where you can't see it at all. I think employees know where it is. If you dine in the back, you can see it, but that's probably within 120 feet. I don't know exactly. I haven't measured it, but it seems kind of distant. So do you think it's possible to shorten that distance?
We definitely can. I would like to see, because ultimately this 120 feet was a placeholder from our current ordinance. If there's other federal standards, other federal publications that would support a lesser number, I would definitely heed that recommendation versus us kind of shooting a number out in the air and seeing if it sticks. At least having something that we can, that would have some backing, I would prefer. But yeah, I'm not against looking at altering that number.
Cool, thanks.
I wouldn't want to make it any further away than 120. I can think of some facades, like District 1 as an example, where just the nature of how sort of the front of a building pops out right to the sidewalk, and bike parking might need to not compete with people passing. I can think of some examples where it can't like be much closer without kind of impinging the walking path to the door. So yeah, I don't know if you can find a standard that's somewhere between 50 and 120. It would surprise me if we could get any closer than that and still make it viable for all the different examples of buildings.
Perfect. Have some research for me to do. I'm curious though, and I think one reason why I'm less concerned about reducing that number is you can see the targeted language change I did. So if you want to get a variance, so to speak, currently on the books it would have to go before planning council, and now under the proposed it would be approved in-house. So if there's some substantial reason where you can't do 75 but you can do 90, okay, I'd rather reduce the red tape as much as I can. So, Trevor?
Just quickly to hasten the research for you, Adam, in the APPP guide, it says in the site planning section for short-term bike parking, which is what we're basically talking about. Short-term bike parking should be visible from and close to the entrance it serves. 50 feet or less is a good benchmark. There you go.
Thank
There we
you.
go.
And then to Adam's
Trevor.
point, if for whatever reason the design of the building, that would be obstructing some sort of safe flow of walking traffic, right?
Yeah.
Then they could just ask for a revision. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Then the next conversation I wanted to have relates to covered bicycle parking. And the note that I have in here, it's intentional, covered or indoor. You see a number of, there's a few examples here in town. I believe Northside Yard is one of the more recent examples where they installed most of their bike parking spaces within the building in lieu of having it outside. But I want to have a conversation as a group as to a requirement in our ordinance for having X% of the required bike parking be covered or indoors. Reason for this conversation, I think I mentioned it to you, Jackie, in the past, is that municipalities across the state, they kind of go three different routes, go down three different routes. First being no requirement at all. Second being 100% has to be. I'm thinking this is City of Milwaukee is a good example. And the other route is kind of that in between, like a City of Madison, where they separate, where they require certain land uses, certain types of development to have, I believe, a minimum of 25% of the required bike parking spaces be covered or indoors. So I want to hear your thoughts hear your thoughts as to, I guess, what route you would prefer.
Indoor. Indoor, 100%. I love that you wanted to have this as part of it. If you live in like an apartment and you have to park your bike outside, a lot of people just bring it inside. They carry it up the stairs. They don't want to leave their bike out in the elements. They don't want to leave it out overnight with a chance of it being stolen. Some bikes are like so expensive now, like that would be a big loss. So they want it protected. And yeah. That was
I
basically
agree, but is that feasible? I mean, for a lot of places to do that, I would like 100% inside too, but
And I think that's kind of the,
what's a compromise?
and that's kind of the conversation we had, Jackie, in the past, is that I think me personally, some of your more intense types of land uses, a la multifamily housing, your larger places of employment, I think there it makes total sense to require it because, you know, if you're going to be proposing a new multifamily apartment complex, you're in the design phase anyways. If we would require so much bike parking spaces to be covered or indoors, they could easily alter the interior layout of the building so that you have one room dedicated for interior bike parking space, like Northside Yard. I'm a little concerned. I do have some concern about the smaller establishments and the hardship that it could pose on them. Hardships being just minimal land to begin with to have a covered, an area for covered bike parking. And if I put my zoning administrator hat on, if you have a covered bike parking area, it'd be treated like a structure. So I would have some requirements for setbacks, for height. Likewise, our building code would apply as well. And it can get very convoluted. It can get very dense. So that's where and expensive. So that's where I'm thinking your larger, more intense land uses, you're on a larger parcel, you have more room to work with, that I think would be fair game. You're smaller.
A smaller, I mean, like a shed type thing covered, but if there's not space to put something up like that, you know, because even if it's like closed on 3 sides, that's still, that's not gonna prevent like theft and stuff. It would help for weathering, but obviously indoor would be the ideal thing.
Yeah, so, I mean, for some, depending on, from a zoning code standpoint, you'd have to have 10 feet of separation between that covered area and the main building. From a building code standpoint, it very well could be more based off of the use classification of that space. Could easily be 20 feet of separation. And so that's where I run into this concern of, do you even have space for some of these spaces?
Because they may have like a 0 line where they can't, you know,
Correct.
do anything.
Or even if they don't have a 0 line, I'm thinking of the new MEJ's vault on Main Street, right? If someone is trying to create a business and they would be required to carve out a portion of the inside to create or install something that would have to adhere to building code out in the parking lot for, I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of design, money, time, and just square foot for their business purpose, whether it's a dentist's office or a coffee shop. Personally, I think that if we can be narrow in this iteration and require I'll just name a few, the Delta Dentals, the Skywards, our own transportation infrastructure, our own parking infrastructure downtown, so that the small shops that are within a couple blocks of what we're building can point to that for their covered parking. The new residences that are probably going to be attractive to people who really want to, you know, walk and bike to their shopping within a few blocks, like the North Side Yard. If we can be narrow with covered parking or inside parking, to be those types of businesses for now, and leave the Cooper Dental and the MEJ's Vault type places that might be in development in our community, not require covered parking for all of those smaller shops. I think that would be an iterative improvement without overly curtailing development, personally. And I'm someone who seeks covered parking, right? Like, I bike to the university where I work, and if there's rain in the forecast, I park under COFAC or under the NFAC and walk an extra block and a half to my building because I don't want a wet seat biking home later, right? I mean, but covered parking is attractive, and I think it will be used and valued by the people that have it, but I just don't think it helps with development of small businesses in our community to mandate that they create it or have it within a certain amount of distance from them in order to open a small business. That's my personal sense. I would welcome response to that.
I think that makes sense. And like Jackie said before, like if you, like we were talking about the parking lots, if you redo a parking lot, change the structure, and make it all different, then it requires a different number of parking. I think if you're gonna do that, there should be like some ordinance where if you make a physical, like when you make a house or build a house, or remodel a house, when you do a certain amount of changes, then the new laws, the new codes and everything go into effect. I think that should be the same with bike parking. If you are going to do a remodel, full remodel, then make sure you put bike parking in. But if you're just gonna paint the outside and maybe do a little landscaping, you don't need to like redo the whole structure just to make room for bikes. Do you get what I mean? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, what are some other businesses or organizations in like if the library were rebuilt downtown,
Right.
I would love to see covered parking be a part of that design. So educational large institutions, if they're, I think they should be included, large corporations,
Right.
educational infrastructure.
Parks.
Parks, yes. Major parks, maybe not that in my neighborhood, Atwell Park is, I don't know, like 100 feet across, 100 feet deep. It's got a few trees, some grass, and one play structure and a couple benches. I don't know that they need a $30,000 or $40,000
Right.
covered parking, concrete infrastructure thing.
But Cash Park could definitely.
But yes, but a book holder, a cat, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, that
Yeah.
could really be beneficial. So I don't know if, Adam, we're giving you what you would need in order to put an asterisk next to the big stuff.
Yeah, I think you can separate it by land use. There can be a note either in the section or in the table, going back and forth, sorry, Trevor. Somewhere in here I could make a note or like an asterisk where these land uses would require covered or interior bike parking.
Well, like you said, parks, I mean, Tiffner and Bucco, are right on the green circle. It'd be nice to have a little, byway place to park your bike if, I don't know, again, the logistics of it that's up to you.
Yeah.
But
A follow-up question before I get to you, Trevor. So once we square away those types of land uses where we would require covered or interior bike parking, what percentage of the bike parking requirement should be of that? Should it be 100% of the needed bike parking spaces has to be covered, 75%, 50%, 25%? What's the threshold?
30 to 50. Like I'm thinking of like a brand new St. Michael's downtown, or the university is building a new building. I think 1/3 being covered and 2/3 being outside kind of meets people's, like if you want it, if that's a priority for you, you're gonna find it. But residential, I wonder if it should be more, because it's less about coming and going and more about overnight protection.
More the short versus long term
Exactly.
stay.
Yeah, that's a way of putting it. Yeah. What am I missing in that? What am I missing in that? So, like, yeah, if someone's popping over to the library, if someone's got a quick appointment at the hospital, 1/3 covered, 2/3 not covered seems reasonable to me. But for a big thing like North Side Yard, I wonder if it should almost be the opposite ratio, 2/3 inside and 1/3 outside, because
You think that outside parking would be more like visitor parking?
that's exactly what I was thinking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say too, just in terms of space that would be needed inside of the building, in hindsight, depending on the type of bike rack that you use, again, you can install multiple, you can provide multiple bike parking spaces per one piece of infrastructure. You know, I think this is the example I used internally is think of a traditional vehicle parking stall, 9 feet wide by 18 feet in depth. You can fit a good number of bike parking spaces within one vehicle parking space. So if it would be required to be within the building, I don't think it would be, you would utilize that significant amount of square footage.
No, and we'd want to think about accessibility, and I wonder if we'd want to include some recommended design, because some could be wall-mounted to save space.
Saves
There can be like stackable too, I think, so you have one row down below and one row on top.
As long as people that use tricycles or other things,
I know the APBP has some examples similar to this for the rack or a wall rack or a wall-mounted rack.
yeah, as long as there's some accessibility and space efficiency balance, yeah.
Yep. Trevor?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I basically agreeing with everything that's been said. I was going to actually recommend adding an indoor bike parking. APBP has a vertical and a 2-tier as examples in the guide. So images of that would help. I think, Jackie, you hit upon the head. The north side yard is, because it has mixed use, I think it's a mix of both, right? Even though the commercial locations aren't filled, if they were to be filled, then you do have that need for temporary parking at the base level. So that one's kind of a unique case, I think, in mixed use developments, where both the long-term and the short-term storage is important. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Any other comments about the covered? If not, I got some good direction, so. Okay. I guess, any last comments about the ordinance itself before we move over to the table? And that was where the fun begins.
Yeah, I got something, sorry.
Yeah. Trevor?
So if you look at 3B, so 3B, it says where it says prevents the bicycle wheel from tipping over or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think that is as copacetic as just saying prevents the bicycle from tipping over. You know what I'm saying?
Just strike the wheel of the, or strike these 3 words.
Yep.
Perfect.
Does that make sense then?
That sounds better to me.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Smart
And
that you
then
yeah.
in 3D as in dog, would it make sense to add step through? Because that's, I think, the frame design they're referring to. There's a step through frame. You could just use as like in parentheses example, step through. It's kind of well known in the industry as that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a suggestion. And then 4, it mentions earth and mulch. Now, I'm not like fully opposed to that if we lived in Arizona, but because of having like earth and mulch as surfaces, it would mean that whoever's responsible for shoveling that in the shoulder season, it would not get shoveled. It would just be a pain. So I'm just curious what the commission thinks on omitting that and possibly adding crushed granite or crushed rock as another surface, because that would still be shovelable.
Yeah, there's value in permeability instead of mandating concrete, but I agree that I prefer to park my bike on concrete, right? I don't know what the right solution is, Trevor.
Well, I think like Adam, a long time ago, Plan Commission, a driveway can be built like with crushed granite and is it plastic, unfortunately, but there's a a matrix structure you can fill the gravel with. Is that still a thing?
So yeah, for any residential driveway, folks can use gravel or granite. I think you're probably talking about the underlayment matting or the grid foundation stabilizer that's put below the gravel.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was added in our ordinance. This was before my time, but I think about 2018 or so.
And I guess to me that would be better than concrete, but
I guess why not have it similar to the car parking rules? Like, we wouldn't be able to park on mulch with a car, right?
That is correct. That is. Thoughts from the other folks? Or in general agreement?
I agree with Trevor's point that we should add anything and everything that we allow cars to be parked on. So if that's crushed granite, I don't know all of what that could be, but they should all be listed.
got another idea in a different spot.
I am ready.
Nice. Okay. So in the section 5,
Yes.
would it be appropriate to do a graphic? Because if I was a regular developer that's never done bike parking, defining what an aisle is, defining the row, what's a row when it's just staples or is it a corral? It seems like a graphic would help a lot in that scenario.
We can. We have one already in our zoning code trying to graphically depict the dimensional requirements, aisle width requirements, landscaping requirements for a parking lot. It's doable. I'll have to dust off my graphic design skills, but I'll make it happen.
You might be able to snag it online if it's allowable. I think the APBP might actually have some images. Yeah, on page, what is that? Page 12, the last page has a pretty decent graphic of that, those guidelines, those separations. And then the item 6, I'm wondering if it might be cool to have an image of a corral. We don't see these in Stevens Point, but if we want to encourage businesses or developers to do corrals, I think this is a good opportunity to do that. If you're not familiar with a corral, just imagine like a grid rack or a schoolyard rack that's raised above the ground, and there's only 2 feet. So it helps with shoveling and clearing snow. It makes it a lot easier to do that. Sorry, my daughter. And a lot of cities are doing corrals, but also encourage use of public right-of-way to replace sometimes unused pavement with corrals. So I'm wondering if a graphic of that could be included in this.
Yeah, we definitely can. I think by ordinance, how it's worded, that would be permitted anyways with the clause of based on the APBP guidelines. But yeah, if you want to include a graphic to try to make it more vivid, make it stand out more, that type of infrastructure would be supported and welcomed, by all means, I could include that.
I also think in that having the picture, like I say, you don't know what you don't know. So if you just saw those pictures, you go, oh, these are my options. And if it wasn't there, they wouldn't possibly know.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I got one other thing, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I missed it, but there was no mention of artistic bike parking. And we have at least several in our community that are not meeting current zoning, and they wouldn't meet this next draft. So I'm wondering if it's simple enough to say in items 6 and 7, something like artistic bike parking should meet all the other specs in this ordinance, or something to that effect.
I'll answer your question with a question. Do you know offhand, Trevor, if the APBP addresses that at all?
That is a great question. I am not sure.
Let me look and see if they have language in there. Then for sure I could just carbon copy what the APBP has.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't see anything yet, but yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. So now with the table itself, so how I have this structured is pretty similar to the table used as I showed earlier for calculating the amount of vehicle parking spaces that's required. So you have the broad land use categories, i.e. residential, commercial, industrial, parks, kind of honed in specifically on the specific types of uses. These are the exact uses that are outlined again for a parking lot ratio or vehicle parking space requirements. So I wouldn't necessarily want to add or remove specific uses because I'd want to keep this consistent with what's already in our code. Really, the big one would be this column here, the calculation for gauging minimum bicycle parking. As you can see here in some of the comments, just to kind of provide a context as to how much we would be talking about, I did include some examples as to if this ratio is applied to existing establishments, this is the number of bike parking spaces that would be required. So multifamily, using Banter as an example, they would be required the 27 here under the 1 space per 3 units, and then kind of going down the line. So I guess we'll start, before I kick it back to the group, Nana, I know you had the comment about parks.
Or ones that are marked none, and then it's like refer back, or unless under, or I don't know.
Yeah, so
Wherever it went.
the parks and
Okay.
open space has none except one recommended within the comprehensive outdoor and recreation plan. This was something that a number of other communities in the state have. So I merely, myself and Anna, we merely just copied what other communities had. So just include the same provision where we wouldn't require it except if this long-range park plan says we ought to, then that would be grounds for me to require it.
It's just a mechanism for us to defer to parks, for them to define what they're using the park for, what they think should exist. In my experience, that's what this is, right? This is deferring to their plans rather than suggesting what they should be doing as this commission to that commission. I think they should have more bike parking.
I know, that's why I'm kind of confused. It's like,
in
what if they're just
parks.
like, no, and we're like, well, that's going to be a popular park, and you don't think you should have any bike parking? Like,
I don't know, our current outdoor rec plan was adopted either earlier this year or last year, but it's goes through 5-year cycles. So, I mean, if that's something that you want to have, you'd like to have that conversation, I could always talk with our parks director of having bike parking needs be addressed in the outdoor rec plan.
Right, we'd hate to wait for them to do it out of Midwestern respect, and they're meanwhile waiting for us to do it. And so just to have an open conversation and to say, if we bypass this, will you include this purposely in your next phase of planning? We're seeing a lack, like when we went to Patch and the park just south of Patch, right? There was nothing.
yeah, I noted that there,
Yeah, I should-
several of us tied our bikes to trees, and it seemed especially odd to me because it was a baseball field where people have games.
And I know some of the parks within the outdoor rec plan address parking lot improvements. I'm thinking of Xenoff as one example about connectivity to the trail system just to the south within the sculpture park. So there's definitely an avenue to have that language. So I mean, if that's kind of the consensus from the commission as it relates to this row, defer to really a future conversation with the Parks Department and see where that conversation goes. Okay. I'll start with the commission first, Trevor, before I'll get to you. Any items from the table that you would like to bring up for conversation?
Ironically, Adam, I would like to bring up the car wash. The 16 to 19-year-olds who often work at the car washes, I think that they, as employees, just like at the grocery store, right, they deserve parking, and so I know you cited it as like, why would you? I think employees of a car wash don't make that much money and are often young, and they might be biking to work.
I think if we would have, and we might have talked about this in the past, Jackie, if we would have a metric, if the metric would be based off of the number of employees, then absolutely. The enforceability of it on my end is super difficult to have the ratio be based off of the number of employees, because I don't know the number of employees that any business has. I guess one thought that I had when you were describing that, Jackie, is, you know, in our zoning code, car washes are a conditional use, right? Could that be something through the conditional use process that a plan commission, a council adds a condition saying, hey, if the proposed development calls for 2 employees, there can be a condition placed on the permit saying you would have to provide parking for them. I don't know. I'm thinking, because not all car washes are staffed, some are automatic, that those once-off scenarios where you have a car wash that is staffed by someone a full-time, if under those scenarios, since we have this mechanism of review through the city by way of a conditional use permit, we can require bike parking through that avenue.
You're right. I grew up in a community with a PDQ with tons of young staff, right? Like washing and drying and spraying things down. But you're right, that was just my experience as a kid. That's where we got our car wash. There are other car washes that are staffed by no one. You're absolutely right, and I hadn't thought of that example. And so I would defer to you in terms of what mechanism is easiest to enforce.
I'm thinking like Tommy's, for example, I believe has one person staffed more for the
Several.
at least, yeah, they at least have folks that are staffed. But like a Quick Trip car wash, for example, they don't have anybody for the car wash facility. Of course, for the gas station component, they do. But yeah, I could think about it a little bit more. If I think of another avenue besides just including it in the CUP conditional use process. Any other comments from the commission to start for the table?
I guess my other question for outdoor recreation, there's stadium or arena, and it says 1 space per 20,000 square feet. Maybe I just like lack spatial awareness, but that seems like a lot of square footage to only have one, and a lot of people go to a stadium if there's like an event, so that like I have kids and I go to the track and field and everybody just locks their bike to the fence. Everybody locks their bike to the bleachers. So I'm just curious about that determination, I guess.
That, so the determination used was, we just copied what other communities have.
Sure.
For that ratio. So scientifically, I can't explain the merits to have it be that specific number versus it being more or less. So.
I think that's also determined by like what you do for cars. Like, say Gorky, is that what you would do for their parking lot? If you were building that now, would you determine the space, how many cars you would have by square footage?
I'd have to look in the vehicle parking ratio table to see, but my assumption would be it would be based off of square footage as well.
Okay.
I agree with Nina, though. It doesn't pass the gut check. I'm really good with changing that, especially when we think about like a Gerke Park or like a future baseball stadium over by the Moose Lodge or something like that. It makes sense to, let's knock that down.
What page was that on again?
19.
Okay. I got a lot of 19. Oh, I see, okay. Is there a specific number that folks are thinking of?
I was wondering if we could go by, like, I don't know, because, like, I would think about, like, when the events happen, people park all over the place. It's like there's not enough parking even for cars for such events, and then there's also no parking for bikes. And I wonder if it's like something we could go by, like average attendance of something, or how many seats, or is that not?
Well,
no? Okay. That's fine.
So we can do seats. The one thing I'm leery of, and I kind of laugh at this every time I see it. There is one example in the parking lot, this parking lot table, where it utilizes seat as the ratio, and that's for places of
Churches.
worship. Yes, so it's 1 per 4 seats of 4 seats, and then if it's benches, 1 seat is 20 inches in width. So like,
How you get a Lambo?
you know, the intent might be just how I administer it, you know.
No,
That'd be tough.
If a square foot is what you can pull up on a map and quickly know compared to counting seats, I'm fine with using a square foot for stadiums
that's
and
fine.
similar. But I'm thinking 1 space per 5,000 square foot, or 1 space per, because again, we pack a lot of people into those spaces when there is an event. So unless we can find a different comp that makes more sense, 1 to 5,000 is better with the gut check for me, and I would throw that out there until someone complains or says otherwise.
Concur for the commission, or?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like spatial awareness, but I felt like that was a lot of space.
Well, because one rack for one space for 20,000 square feet, what's the point, really?
Exactly.
Should be more.
Any other comments for the table broadly?
Port and terminal, can you give us an example of a port or a terminal
I did write
in
that
our
question down.
community?
There, as far as I know, there really wouldn't, I mean, I think the one example that could be in the future, not currently, is the transit hub proposed on the Shopko lot. That would be the one example of something in the future. Currently,
Then it shouldn't be none.
I just don't know what the, I guess, what would be, is there a ratio that would stand out for you then?
I don't know. I mean, if a port or a terminal includes our future transit hub, I imagine that we'll eventually have Greyhound or other regional service, bus systems servicing that. And I imagine students and someone like me, like I would totally bike down with a backpack and leave my bike in covered parking there and get on a bus to go to Chicago for 3 days. I would want it to be covered, and it shouldn't be nothing.
Yeah, I can look and see some more communities, what they have for a metric.
Yes, please.
I can scroll down too, Jackie, if you want me to. This isn't the only page, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was my last note. What is port and terminal?
That was your last one?
Yeah, that we haven't covered.
What about like warehouse and distribution? I'm just thinking like for like employees.
Yeah, so the industrial section here, that was arguably the most difficult for me. personally, I'd rather use the employees as the metric. Just going back to my comment earlier, the enforceability of that is nil. And so that's why there's been a range from other communities as to what number they use for the square footage. Some have done less than this, some have done a little bit more than this. So these 40 and 50,000 square foot is honestly kind of the middle point, the median that I've seen from other communities.
Okay.
It's tough. I mean, because one option I was thinking in my head is, could you differentiate between the office type uses within a industry, within a, so I'm thinking like Lineage, for example. Do you want to separate it by the office space within the building versus that of the warehouse and distribution space of the building? But there it just kind of gets to semantics, so kind of gets to the, it gets a little bit more difficult to apply this uniformly.
I don't know that we're going to get it right the first time. I think that it's great that you've got some benchmarking. It's great that we're checking our gut on some of these, but, and it's great that a new distribution center will be forced to, do some calculations and install some bike parking. It might not be sufficient, but it's really hard to know without getting into use and employee count.
Mm-hmm.
It's still iterative positive change.
I guess, do we get to like reassess the plan at like a sooner than later, say like instead of like 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, reassess, or 3 years, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Time
really,
awareness.
at any time.
Be like,
At
this
any time
clearly
you
was
can.
the wrong ratio.
But it's going to take a while for folks to build, right? Like this, if this is all future
Correct.
applicability,
Yeah.
just how long it takes to propose a new building and to actually construct it and then to get people in it and using it. I don't know if we're going to even know how successful this is in a decade, right? With some of these unique uses. But yeah, we can reassess it whenever.
Okay.
Can you scroll back up to the bottom of that? Yes, thank you. I'm struggling with the restaurants and bars because I think it totally depends on where they are more than square feet in terms of their vibe and their clientele and whether or not it's, I don't know, I'm struggling with that one.
That was one that I struggled with the most. And that's why I had the 2 spaces or the 1 per 4,000 square feet, whichever is greater, to account for the wide range of restaurant sizes that exist. You have some that are, restaurant spaces in the downtown where the floor area is, using Arbuckle's, that's a pretty big space, but they're 3,175 square feet. They're arguably bigger than most places downtown. But then you have other, like a Michelle's off at Division, and we got a lot of floor area there. So it's hard to make a code requirement that's uniform for all of them.
Yeah, it's so, like Oso's, and I know that's not in the city of Stevens Point, right? It's huge, but I can't anticipate a lot of people biking to Oso's. It's just not very biker friendly. But then there are much smaller places like Goose that, right, the bike parking out in front of Goose is always full. So yeah, I'm not sure how much floor size versus sort of location. I'm not sure that I have a better idea. I'm just struggling with how to codify the sort of geography of popular places by bike and what they would need.
I could always look at, provide some other, some alternative metrics to see, would an alternative metric be more favorable versus what's shown on the screen.
I wonder what Madison and Middleton are using.
I feel like Madison was one of the one of the benchmarks that Anna and I use that
Yeah.
I'd put money on that they have the same thing as that.
Okay, I yield. Yeah, those were my only comments.
Any other thoughts from the comments from the commission? Otherwise, Trevor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I guess going back to the rec plan waiting game,
Yes.
I think some people mentioned it might be good to have this ordinance still spell out that we want bike parking. I think that's warranted. Obviously, having a conversation with the director makes sense. Good example is Groholski Park, which is brand new. Has all the facilities built, but there's no bike parking. Which doesn't really make sense to me, because if you look at all the infrastructure there, it's easily tens of thousands of dollars. But if you want to park your bike, you just throw it on the grass, I guess. So it'd be nice to have that, ordinance invoked before the whole planning phase of each park, et cetera, you know what I mean? I think it just keeps it more consistent with the whole city, and kind of treating all the departments equally. For example, fire and police might be nice to make sure everything is consistent.
Okay.
I had one other thing, but I'm not remembering what it was. So I apologize, but
No worries.
anyway, thanks.
So unless there's any other comments on this, I'll finish by saying this is the first of several conversations we'll have on this amendment to the bike parking ordinance. There'll be more to come. So next time we meet, I'll try to shoot for, we got some SS4A stuff earlier in the month, so maybe mid to late January, I'll shoot to have another BPSSC meeting where I can propose some of the changes that we talked about and further the conversation. Ultimately, I want you folks as a commission to do more of this legwork early on. The approval process would be you folks, and then ultimately our plan commission and council, since they have jurisdiction over amending the city zoning ordinance. So there'll be more conversations to follow.
Okay, item number 5, discussion on the Portage County Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan update.
Okay, now I got to go back to the slides. Oh, jeepers. So, there's been a lot of work, as Trevor can attest to, as Carolyn, you can attest to, as other folks on the commission can attest to. There's been a lot of work done as it relates to the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. Kind of quick 30,000-foot view. Deliverables as part of this federal grant we received would be to create a comprehensive safety action plan, so identifying locations where there is a higher risk for crashes involving deaths and serious injuries, and then coming up with design solutions to help remedy that risk. Second deliverable would be to update this county's 2014 bicycle and pedestrian plan, and then the third one being to conduct demonstration activities to help aid in the development of those two plans I just mentioned. So start with the bike ped plan. So this is the table we just received from Vanderwall and Associates, one of our sub-consultants working on updating the plan. So they've been hard at work the last few weeks and months working on the update to the plan. There are some key actions that will be taken over the next couple of weeks. First being that of a public survey that will be released, I think this Friday, I believe would be the 20th. Yep, this Friday. This will be open through the end of January. What my plan is at least internally through a few folks, I'll let folks know of this survey, that it's live. Ultimately, the big media push, I'm probably going to wait till after the first of the year, just, with the holidays coming up, that's the last thing I'm going to be thinking about personally, as I'm sure many other folks. But there's going to be a public survey released on Friday, so I encourage you folks to let people in your social circles know that that's available and encourage them to fill it out. Included in the packet, I did provide a copy of the draft survey. That would start on page 23 of the packet. It's a pretty condensed version, thankfully. I really appreciate their work and not having a super long survey. Sometimes too much data could be problematic to decipher. One of the things I think is going to be really beneficial for you folks is at the end of the survey, there'll be an online interactive map. This will be through Esri, which basically a GIS platform where you can provide comments, or you can provide comments to specific intersections that you think are of issue. You can draw lines or polygons denoting certain areas where you think bike parking facilities or bicycle infrastructure should be located, where additional sidewalks should be located, where sidewalks are not. So it's more of an interactive tool where you can physically draw on that map to say what infrastructure improvement should be added, and likewise, are there existing infrastructure in place that should be designed differently that's not accustomed to current practices. So that's going to be a big deliverable coming up. Next, there will be some workshops that'll occur. That'll be similar to the public informational meeting that occurred at Midstate. I know, Alder Guthrie, you were there about a month ago or so. So something similar to that. There'll be 2 workshops, one focusing on the urban core, Point Plover, and adjacent municipalities, and then one focusing on the rural areas. Locations are still TBD, but the rough timeline would be the week of January 13th through the 17th. Once I get more information, I'll let you folks know, so if you wanted to attend. And then lastly, I think this line would be the biggest note, when the first draft of the plan update will occur. So tentatively, it's planned to be this upcoming February. So what my hope is that when we get to a point where a draft plan is created, either myself or preferably someone from Vanderwall can present to you folks. Since you, as a commission, are a avid stakeholder in updating this plan, that I think it's only naturally right for you folks to have some participation in the update. Next, would be the safety action plan. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, identifying locations where there's higher safety risk and designing those intersections appropriately to mitigate that risk. That's focusing on all different road users, including vehicle users, as well as bike and ped users. That's focusing on the safe systems approach that's noted on the slide. Included in the packet, I did provide the SparkNotes version of the survey results that we received over the last month or so for that public survey. There was about, Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong, about 900 to 910 survey responses that were received for this countywide survey, which is great, a great number, more than what our consultant figured we were going to get. So I really appreciate all those who have took the time to complete the survey. As part of creating the safety action plan, one of the things that's being worked on internally, I know we didn't talk about this much, Trevor and Carolyn, through our task force meetings last week, but one of the things that's being worked on internally is to filter the list of intersections that would be looked at further as part of the safety action plan. And so right now, what I included, there'll be 2 slides. First slide would be intersections of streets that are under local jurisdiction, so under the city's jurisdiction, under county highways jurisdiction. So this is the tentative list. This is not etched in stone. This is not going to be the end result. But I think it's pretty safe to say that a good majority of these will be. The methodology that was used by our consultant to identify these intersections, focus more so on economic loss that would be generated as a result of property damage that occurs because of a crash. This might be morbid to say, but the economic loss of a fatality or a serious injury that occurs because of a crash. If you want this list, I can send that to you privately, but you know, some of these intersections are not surprising, like HH and Crossroads down by Walmart, Jefferson in Michigan. We've got a high amount of foot traffic, Stanley in Minnesota, Minnesota and Post Road. So really not shocking when all is said and done. And then this next slide would be focusing on intersections under state and or federal jurisdiction. Out of all the intersections that were reviewed by the consultant, the one intersection that had the greatest amount of economic loss was US Highway 10 and Maple Bluff. That would be the intersection going to Target.
Yeah.
So not surprising. That's unfortunately kind of what I figured. So last thing that I'll say, and Trevor, you know quite well, the last thing that we're working on as relates to this SS4A is to fine tune the list of the locations and types of demonstration activities that will be occurring during the spring, summer, and fall months of 2025. We last had a subcommittee meeting on the county level last week, Wednesday, and our plan is to finalize the locations and types of demonstration activities that will occur sometime in early to mid-January. So this is just what's on the screen is the initial list of Stevens Point intersections that were proposed. This is, again, not etched in stone.
Do we mean Michigan and Price?
Yes. Yeah, not Paris.
Is Hoover an industrial? So I know that our streets division is working on resignaling Hoover and industrial, and it's near an apex of a multi-use path. And I didn't know if it's being planned for improving bike and pedestrian infrastructure, planned for within SS4A, or if it's being sort of kicked to streets because they're already planning for it with AE. I want to make sure that bike infrastructure is a component of that intersection being redesigned, and I don't want it missed between multiple sort of projects going on simultaneously.
Yeah, it would be the latter. So that intersection was identified, as well as a slew of intersections along the Business 51 corridor where there's a higher amount of economic loss. However, my perspective, Director Badoon's perspective, Superintendent Johnson's perspective is that it doesn't pay to include this as part of the SS4A project since we're already in the design phase for all those intersections. So yes, that'll be addressed through streets.
Okay, great. And then my other question was, help me understand where updating school safety traveling fits within SS4A deliverables right now.
That would be more, I'd say more of the bike and ped plan. We had a really good conversation with, so today and tomorrow we have a bunch of focus groups with community stakeholders, and that was brought up a lot about wanting to have a designated map that says if you want to get from Jefferson to an adjacent Jefferson school to an adjacent bus stop or to the downtown or other higher traffic areas, this is the route that you have to go to. One of the issues so that would be one deliverable as part of the bike ped plan, I gotta suspect would be.
Within SS4A when you say the bike ped plan? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add too, that was a comment that I think would be interesting for the commission to know is there was a perspective that the bicycle facility signs that are installed, so the signs denoting hey, you have a shared bike lane through the next X number of miles, that's not as up to date as what it should be when new bike infrastructure gets installed or new street reconstructions, new streets altogether. So that's just an onus on us to update those signs as new bike lanes become installed.
Okay.
So,
Thanks, I yield.
any other, I guess, this is more of an update than anything. I know it's been a bit since we last met as a commission, so there's been a lot, between that and there's been a lot going on the SS4A project, so I wanted to make you folks aware.
Sure.
Trevor?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Because Jackie had brought up the Industrial Park Hoover Road intersection, could you just remind me of the timeline Street is working on with improving that or studying that?
I believe, Alder Guthrie, correct me if I'm wrong, that was included as part of the capital budget for 25, the study for the signalization of it?
Money to provide design funding for the contractor was approved in the last month, I think at finance.
Okay.
So I imagine that means that we're in very early stages.
Exact timeline, Trevor, I don't know, but I mean, I could always
Okay.
talk with Director Badun and see.
Okay, that'd be great. The reason I asked is because if it were to fall in line with our demonstration activities, even though you said it probably wouldn't, this could be a really good opportunity to try out a protected intersection, which helps bicyclists and pedestrians. Because right now, anybody that uses this as a cyclist, including myself, it's sort of a death trap. Mainly because of the Hoover overpass and the speed that automobiles accrue on the downward slope headed south. So even a signalized intersection would not improve that very well. I mean, people beating yellow lights, for example, they're going to go faster. So could this be an opportunity for something new, a protected intersection? Demonstration activity could try it out before it's permanent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we could bring up to John Campbell from TADDY at our next DA subcommittee meeting, Trevor.
Where is industrial? I just can't.
The old Delta Dental, Hirschner's.
Okay, that's what I
Okay.
thought. Okay.
Any
Thank you.
other comments, questions? That is all.
This meeting is adjourned.
There we go.
Good job, Anna.
7.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.